Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our How to Talk About Abortion and Bust Stigma training. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to come in. So now is a great time to grab a glass of water, a favorite snack, and prepare for this really awesome training that we put together.
We have more signups, Caitlyn.
Yeah, I'm sending over the webinar info right now and giving folks a few more minutes to come on in.
Hello, everyone. We're about to start. We're just giving a few more minutes for people to sign up. We've got last-minute signups, so we're sending the information for everybody to join us.
I think we're going to give it just one more minute. Really appreciate everyone's patience. We had a little bit of technical difficulties this evening, so it's going to give them 45-ish more seconds. Great. Well, I think we can get started, Casey. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming to our How to Talk About Abortion and Bust Stigma training. We are so excited to go through this training with you. For a little bit of context for folks who don't live in the DC area, me and Casey developed this training last year, and over the course of the past year have worked to improve it and make sure it has information that is helpful. So we hope tonight you walk away with some good information, you gain some confidence in talking about abortion and access, and just have a good time. So this first voice you're hearing is Caitlyn Blenny. I am the organizing lead at Reproaction. We are a national direct action organization working to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. I'm based here in the DC area, which is where I do most of my organizing, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hello, everyone. This is Casey Chavez, and I'm the organizer for NARAL, Virginia. My area of organizing is Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William County. A little bit about NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia. We're building the political power for the pro-choice Virginians and working to ensure every Virginia woman can make the personal reproductive decisions that are best for herself and her family without stigma or political interference. This includes preventing unintended pregnancies, having healthy pregnancies and births, and choosing safe legal abortion. Welcome, everyone.
So before we get started, I want to take a second to acknowledge everything that's happening with abortion access right now. In addition to dealing with a global pandemic, we are sort of in limbo right now with SCOTUS waiting to hear the decision in a case called June Medical Services v. Russo, which has to do with Louisiana law that requires physicians providing abortion care to have admitted privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of their clinic. This is a clear example of a trap law, which for folks who don't know, are targeted regulations of abortion providers. And these laws are designed to single out abortion providers and impose requirements that are different and more burdensome than those imposed on other medical practices and doctors. We should make no mistake, trap laws are usually not medically justified, and the intent of trap laws is to close abortion clinics. So a few examples of trap laws, what we're seeing right now in the Supreme Court case, hospital admitting privileges. The issue with hospital admitting privileges is in most cases, a provider has to admit a certain number of people to the hospital in order to gain those admitting privileges, which often does not happen in abortion care because complications are extremely rare. Other examples include requiring hallways to be a certain length, which can require costly and unnecessary modifications, and requiring even the grass outside to be cut to a certain height. I want to note that in Texas, back in 2013, trap restrictions, which you may recall came as a result of HB2, was argued in the Supreme Court in Whole Women's Health v. Helderset, where it was ruled unconstitutional, is what caused 40 clinics to close in Texas in 2013. So these laws do have an impact on access. It's often very difficult for clinics to reopen after they close. And in the case of Texas, we saw how that decimated access. If this law was to go into effect, it'd be a similar situation in Louisiana. In addition to everything that's happening with the Supreme Court, if that wasn't stressful enough, we are right now dealing with a global pandemic, which has made accessing abortion even more difficult. We're going to talk more about this later and some really great ways to respond to common arguments against providing abortion care right now. But I want to just note that we're gonna make a note of it later on. And that being said, we are also at the same time excited to talk about the changes in Virginia's abortion laws. And for folks who may not be from the DC or Virginia area, Virginia just scrapped many of our restrictions on abortion, and it'll be a lot easier to seek care in the Commonwealth. So we're very excited to get started. Logistically, you are free to drop questions in the question box at any time. We do have about 10 to 15 minutes saved for the end to tackle your questions. And you can also just save them for later if you want. Cool. So I want to just start our presentation off by defining stigma. So we know for many, the decision to become a parent may be one of the biggest choices they'll ever make in their lives. And despite that, we've seen for decades the right demonize people who seek abortion care, work to defund providers, and criticize those who support access to abortion. We here today know that people are capable of making decisions that are best for their bodies, their lives, and their families. And we're all here because we need to defend that right. So what is stigma? We hear stigma a lot in our work, so I'm just going to give a definition that we'll use for this presentation. So stigma is the perspective that something is morally wrong or unacceptable. In the context of our work, it means that doing activism related to abortion, working in abortion, can be seen as controversial or deviant. A few other terms that I want to define for this presentation. The first is reproductive stigma, which we're going to use as an umbrella term. Reproductive stigma is the labeling, judgment, discrimination, or poor treatment that people face when their reproductive experiences fall outside the norm. So this may be, of course, associated with abortion, but also infertility, pregnancy loss, adoption, or the decision to become a parent at a young age. The other stigma I want to mention is abortion stigma. So this is the shared understanding that abortion is somehow morally wrong or socially unacceptable. And young parent stigma, which is the shared belief that young people, those expecting or parenting under the age of 25, are inferior or unworthy of our trust, support, and resources. So stigma is perpetuated in a number of ways. It starts with us here as individuals. Individuals may experience stigma in the form of shame or guilt and worry about being judged by others. People in the community create and perpetuate societal norms, hold prejudice, and engage in negative attitudes towards people who have abortion. Institutions can employ practices that marginalize abortion, which often lead to poorer quality of care. So an example of this may be a religious institution or university saying our medical students aren't allowed to learn about abortion care, which we know leads to poorer health outcomes. And it's also perpetuated through law and policy. So state, federal, and global policies can create discriminatory practices that prevent access to safe abortion care. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the global gag rule, which is a global policy the US implements that prevents NGOs that take money from the US from talking, referring, or providing abortion care. And despite that, people still seek care. The last one is mass media, which may frame abortion as something that is taboo or controversial and will perpetuate the stereotype that people who have abortions are selfish, immoral, young, and already childless, which we of course know the majority of people seeking abortions are already parents. So how can we address stigma? Activists all over the country are doing some really awesome stuff, including art, music, film, docuseries, and more. But today, one tactic in particular, just transformational conversations. Through this training, we hope to give you the tools and confidence you need to start these conversations in your own community. I'm going to turn it back over to Casey.
Thank you. So tip number one, we need to stop perpetuating the idea that there is good versus bad reasons for having an abortion. When we use that framing, it reinforces the view that there is few legitimate reasons for having an abortion. We should distance ourselves from the safe, legal, and rare language because it only perpetuates a stigma. No one but the pregnant person is qualified to decide if an abortion is right for them. So the takeaway, when we force to meet the criteria for abortion worthiness, it means that in a world where the goalposts are ever shifting and where the playing field is far from level, a lot of people will be disqualified.
So tip number two, to not assume that abortion is a devastating choice with dangerous mental health implications. So it's assumed a lot of the time that people who have abortions will be or should be deeply conflicted about the experience. And expressing uncomplicated feelings about an abortion can leave someone being branded as heartless, which often only further perpetuates that stigma. This belief can also make people feel pressure to express more conflict about their abortion than they actually feel. Research from the University of California, San Francisco found that 95% of women report that having an abortion was the right decision for them over 5 years after the procedure. The main takeaway here is that there are a lot of normal responses to abortion, but always framing the experience as difficult invalidates the wide range of experiences people actually have.
You want to tip number three? Okay. Tip number three, abortion is common. 1 in 4 women will have an abortion before 45. Abortion is treated as a thought. It is completely separate from other reproductive healthcare services. It's not. And this can not only make people having abortions feel alone or isolated, abortion should be included in discussions about healthcare because abortion is healthcare.
Cool. So now we're going to shift into some myth busting, which I promise you we have lots of wonderful gifts that we handpicked for you. Cool. So our first myth is that abortion is non-essential. So while everybody is mobilizing to make sure that loved ones and neighbors have food and basic necessities, a number of pro-life leaders in a number of states, we won't name names, are trying to capitalize on the pandemic. They've wasted no time turning to conservative politicians and governors with plans to designate abortion as a non-essential service and to force clinics to stop providing care. Ultimately, abortion is a time-sensitive procedure that cannot be delayed without risking the health and safety of the patient, which comes directly from a statement from ACOG, which is the American College of OBGYNs. If anything, right now is an opportunity for us to advocate for telemedicine access for medication abortions so people can continue to have abortion care on their own time within the comfort of their home. In addition, as advocates at this time, we really need to be mindful of the risks of criminalization, in particular for people who will be self-managing their abortion. I, of course, have to plug Reproaction has a self-managed abortion campaign on our website. If you would like to learn more about that, I'm always happy to chat.
So abortion is a big business. The inflation-adjusted cost of abortion has remained relatively stable over time, despite increased restrictions and a decline in demand. In fact, abortion providers have maintained a lower than average fees for care compared with physicians in other specialties. Many clinicians provide this care because they know the difference it can make in a woman's life. A state's abortion policy climate can, however, factor into how much a facility charges. Laws that require 2 visits to a clinic are associated with a $107 increase in the price of an abortion, according to the 2015 analysis from the California State University at Long Beach. And we can talk a little bit about the changes in Virginia law. We have advocated this year at the General Assembly in Richmond, and we can, I can just tell you a little bit briefly about the Reproductive Healthcare Act. And basically, this new law that is going to take an effect July 1st is getting rid of the trap regulations. And the trap regulations in Virginia are a 24-hour waiting period, a mandatory ultrasound, and limits who can provide abortions to doctors, and we have increased it to nurse practitioners. So this is some of the restrictions that we have fight this year to pass into law this year, together with a coalition of reproductive rights organizations.
Awesome. Our next myth is people are having abortions up until birth and after birth abortions. This does not happen. This is not how medical care works. This is a fake situation invented to be a distraction for people and voters. Born alive is in no way a medical term. It's political. The anti-abortion movement invented partial birth to foster a growing opposition to abortion in the 1980s. This is the same thing that opposition conflates with infanticide, which is also not happening. Unfortunately, these are terms that likely aren't going to go away before the 2020 election. People need care later in pregnancy for a number of reasons. Some people may not know they're pregnant. Some people need more time to decide. Some experience barriers in getting care earlier. In addition, the stigma against abortion, and in particular abortion later in pregnancy, has been met with violence instead of compassion. We saw in 2006, tragically, Dr. George Tiller was shot and killed in his church for providing that care. Restrictions put in place by anti-abortion politicians actually lead people to seek care later in pregnancy. Furthermore, politicians in Washington, D.C. and state capitals don't know what every person in their family is going through. When you have a one-size-fits-all restriction, it hurts people who are going through complicated issues. The most important thing to take away from this is that when you talk about abortion later in pregnancy, you're talking about real people who need compassion and not judgment and regulation. So shifting our language here. So most of us try to live our lives without interfering with other people's lives. We know that someone may need to end a pregnancy for different reasons, and we can't make that decision because we haven't walked in their shoes. People and families in these situations need compassion and support, not other people telling them what to do. So harmful language, partial birth, late term, born alive, again, not medical terms, 100% political, and helpful terminology that is positive and is not stigmatizing is abortion later in pregnancy.
So abortion is dangerous. That's a myth. Abortion is extremely safe. It's safer than getting a colonoscopy, and is estimated to be 10 times safer than giving birth. Over 99.75% of abortions do not cause major medical problems. This is a study for Gutmaker. Furthermore, restrictions on abortions aren't because it's dangerous, but instead are driven by ideology instead of credible information and research. Restrictions on abortion are often used as a scare-shaming tactic by opposition and is intended to close clinics.
So this myth, taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for other people's abortions. This is like my favorite gift ever, so I'm so happy I have an opportunity to use it. So if somebody comes at you with the argument that they don't want their taxpayer money going towards abortion, federal law already prohibits federal dollars from going to abortion except in dire circumstances, and that's because since 1976, the Hyde Amendment has blocked federal Medicaid funding for abortion services. This means Medicaid can't even cover abortion when the pregnant person's health is at risk and their doctor recommends they have one. That being said, the majority of voters, as of the latest polling, support lifting the Hyde Amendment. So something that we can shift people with. Instead of framing this as there should be no taxpayer funding of abortion, we're talking about a lifting abortion coverage ban. No one should be denied health care, including access to abortion, just because of where they live or how much money they make.
Sorry, I forgot the mute button. Mythbusting. People would not need abortions if they were more responsible. Abortion is a common medical procedure sought by a people of all racial, income, religious, geographic demographics. Most people who seek abortion care report using birth control. Contraceptives, even when properly and consistently used, occasionally fail. Many people do not have access to comprehensive sex education, plus use the contraception incorrectly or relying on ineffective methods. Moreover, contraceptives are not always made easily accessible or not always affordable. In addition, with the pandemic, many people who have lost their jobs may not have access to insurance or the money needed for contraception.
So this myth, which is abortion is racist. So the charge that abortion is racist is very common in the pro-life movement. You may recall many years ago, a pro-life group in Texas put up a billboard in New York City that said the most dangerous place for an African-American was the womb. In this case, this framing, it makes Black women who are the victims of racism, the quote unquote real racist. The metaphor ignores the autonomy of Black women and whittles women down to a vessel, and in this place, a hostile vessel. Imagery of abortion as slavery or genocide allows abortion opponents to appear as anti-racist without having to do anything to learn about the lives of Black women or do anything regarding the history of slavery and segregation. I love quoting Danielle Brown, who is NARAL Maryland's communications director, who says, "Too often women of color, and in this case Black women, are ignored when it comes to their mental, physical, and reproductive health. Black women have higher rates of complications during pregnancy and when giving birth. They're 3 times more likely than white women to die from these complications. Reproductive rights are inextricably linked to the movement for Black lives. And we cannot subjugate and stigmatize Black women for their reproductive choices."
Mythbusting, abortion rate in the United States is skyrocketing. The abortion rate in the United States is at a record low, thanks to the people being able to better control their fertility and contraception. There are many reasons the rate is declining, including but not limited to better access to reproductive health care, such as contraceptives and sex education, increased legal restrictions, lower birth rates, around pregnancies, and the potential for at-home abortions, the self-managed abortions that Caitlyn was referring to.
So this next myth is most people can easily access abortion in the United States. This is absolutely not true. There are a number of barriers that make access to abortion care difficult. This includes state restrictions, which Casey mentioned, a lot of the ones we just got off the books in Virginia, which include waiting periods, mandatory counseling, ultrasound requirements, and more. In addition, there are often other barriers not imposed by legal restrictions, which include needing time off of work, needing to find the money, and securing childcare. With COVID-19, this crisis has gotten a lot worse. Guttmacher has found that people are being forced to drive greater distances, and this is all happening when extended travel or any travel is essentially against what public health recommendations are, and in some cases, legal orders. For some populations, this is especially harmful, in particular, young people and those experiencing violence in the home. Extended travel may not be possible right now that, there are family members and housemates around to know where they are. On Guttmacher's website, if you're interested in seeing the states that have deemed abortion non-essential and have banned the procedure, and you're interested in learning more about essentially the barriers people are facing there, Guttmacher has a great page on their website that outlines each of the states.
Mythbusting, if abortion were illegal, there would be no more abortions. This is not true. Banning abortions will never stop people from having abortions. If Roe versus Wade were overturned, the fate of abortion legality will fall into the hands of the state legislators. Abroad, U.S. policies like the global gag rule that Caitlyn mentioned before, also known as the Mexico City policy, prevent doctors from talking about or referring for abortion. And yet, people still seek abortion care. Furthermore, criminalizing abortion only sends providers and people who have and provide their own care to jail.
Great. So we're going to shift into, how do we start these conversations about abortion? And I really love this image from the See Change program, which sort of gives us a view of, the spectrum of views on abortion. And so something to think about before you're engaging in conversations with those in your community, friends, family, whoever you may be trying to have a conversation with, consider where they might be on this chart and how realistically you will be able to shift them. So for example, if somebody is violent towards abortion, that is somebody I'd say, we probably should not be engaging in a conversation with. We're not going to take them from violence to activism. But being honest with yourself about where the person is, and being honest about where you can shift them. If you can shift somebody from disgust to aversion, I think that's a win within itself. The other thing I want to point out with this is that a lot of people will fall into this sort of bluish gray area of they just don't have opinions, or they generally support, but they don't feel comfortable and confident in engaging a conversation. So thinking about where you can shift people, and also thinking about if you have a bunch of pro-choice friends where, you know, if you ask them, they'll maybe say, you know, I stand with Planned Parenthood, or, you know, just stuff about reproductive rights, but not necessarily abortion. We can move them from acceptance maybe to activism, which is definitely counts as a win. So as activists, we're working to have these conversations that resonate, inspire, and activate our communities towards change. Dialogue, storytelling, and intentional conversations are powerful tools that we can use to strengthen our movement. As a direct action organization, I feel like I have to say it, nonviolence is always the most courageous way to respond. It is very easy to lash out, but it's very difficult to hold in your emotions and act from a principled place. I know many of us are very passionate about reproductive rights and abortion access, and it can be really difficult to be in spaces where somebody just completely disagrees with you or is saying something that's super stigmatizing and wrong. You may not be in a place where you feel like you can do this yet, and that's totally fine. You know, it's probably taken me, I've been doing this work for about 5 or 6 years now, and, you know, only decided to engage in these kinds of conversations with my conservative family about 3 years ago. And, you know, definitely over time, I didn't think I'd make as much progress as I have, but I am very proud of myself for pushing myself to have those conversations. So before we start, I want to give some tips. So before you have your conversation, you want to understand your own values and beliefs on abortion access. Having a set of values that you can draw back on during your conversation will help. So a value, for example, something I draw back onto is access to abortion is essential for bodily autonomy, and that is essential for our community. We also want to have a clear intention and purpose for the conversation. Are you trying to raise awareness, change attitudes, or grow community? Consider your own strengths and weaknesses, and don't be afraid to reach out for help. Also know that you're not going to have one like epic conversation where the person, you know, leaves on a different point of the spectrum. Often these happen over a series of conversations that you'll have with that person. The last tip that we're going to give you is your message should be about your audience, not for your audience. We shouldn't dictate what they think, and we're going to have to meet them where they're at if we're hoping to have these types of conversations. I'm going to turn it back to Casey to talk through some of the values that we can use and draw on during conversations.
Sure. Core values to draw from: health, framing, being healthy, being able to get Selfcare from a licensed provider.
So our next one is autonomy, so respecting that people need to make their own important life decisions on their own outside of political interference.
Fair treatment, framing. We shouldn't treat people differently just because they are poor. Politicians are picking on those struggling financially.
And this is a great one. You know, if you have somebody who is super against what you're saying because of the taxpayer point of view, or, you know, I don't want the government using my money type people, this is a great value to draw on. So some conversation barriers and motivators. So I just mentioned the one before, but if somebody is saying that people who have abortion are irresponsible, we can respond and turn that around to be about respecting personal decision making. If someone's uncomfortable about abortion, maybe they think abortion is being used as birth control, or there's too many abortions, or people are too young to decide. Reframing this as politics and politicians should not be engaged in those conversations. If somebody is saying it's immoral, it's not for us to judge. Concerns about abusing Medicaid or taxpayer money. Medicaid is literally healthcare. Abortion is healthcare. It should be included with Medicaid. And then low-income people taking resources from the government, reframing this that everybody deserves equal opportunity, and that by barring low-income people from getting the care they need is not economic justice, it's not equal.
Tips: speak in first person, we or us. Help audience picture a real person, use stories and examples. You have your own, then share somebody else's stories. Use language that respects the dignity of people who have abortions. Talk about barriers, how they are created. Share how to get involved, take action. Join me or Caitlyn on any action.
Things that you want to avoid. So we want to avoid technical terms. I know we use the acronym TRAP at least 10 times in this presentation, but you do not want to enter a conversation using TRAP or CPC or other acronyms that we use within activism. We want to avoid speculations or hypotheticals. You shouldn't be talking about an imaginary person. Real people every day have abortions, and it is a common and normal experience. We want to avoid using opposition language or framing. So I talked a little bit about it by avoiding terminology like late term or born alive. We want to just avoid that. Another great example of this, instead of saying heartbeat bills, I know last May, there were a number of heartbeat bills passed in a number of states. They were called heartbeat bills. We can reframe that to be extreme abortion bans or just abortion bans. That avoids us from using opposition language that is rooted in no scientific fact. We also want to avoid stereotyping. You should just avoid stereotyping in general. This is more of like a be a good person thing. But again, people who have abortions should be treated with respect and dignity. And we want to avoid the good versus bad abortion dichotomy, which Casey mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. There's no right or wrong reason to have an abortion. Cool. So we're going to go into questions, and I'm going to apologize in advance. This is my first time using this webinar platform, so I think I see all your questions. But also feel free, if I haven't answered yours, to redrop it in the chat box.
I wanted to thank everybody to join us. I appreciate, and we will have a follow-up event coming up, so just stay tuned.
And Jessica asked if we will send copies of the slide. Yes. I also want to, Larissa asked, is there a statistic or another talking point you can give us related to the fact that heavier restrictions lead to abortion later in pregnancy? I can email it to you. I unfortunately don't have it in front of me right now, but I can absolutely get you that statistic.
We can talk about the Texas bans, and then people have to travel to other states. That will put you into a later pregnancy risk, because you have to travel far away, so that for that you run into it later.
Cool. Well, I'm not seeing any questions, so I think we can, maybe I'm looking at this incorrectly, and I apologize if I am. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move us right along. I want to be respectful of all of y'all's time. So reminder to do self-care. It's extremely important right now. Make sure that you are refueling, you're staying hydrated, and you're taking care of your mind and body. It is so important in this moment, but also just to sustain yourself in activist work. This work is really not a sprint, it is a marathon. And you may think change comes really fast, but it often does not. Cool. So if you want to host this training, you should reach out to us. My email is up there on the screen. I can also drop Casey's email in the chat box. But we've been doing these trainings in Virginia and Maryland for the last year now, and we would love to do it over Zoom with you. And in addition, if you asked a question this evening and I didn't see it, I'm so sorry, but please feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to get you any statistics or anything that you might be interested in.
So we have several of the events coming up. We have a virtual town hall about reproductive healthcare services during COVID-19. And we wanted to thank you for participating on this training. We will have a more practice on and hands-on training with conversations coming up soon. So we will let you know about that.
Yes, I should add that usually when we do this presentation in real life, we have like a 30-minute role-playing section. And we would love to do that with you all. We just need to be able to do it in smaller groups. So if you're interested, we will be following up after the webinar with a few dates of if you would like to practice with us. And thank you all so much for taking the time. We really hope that this training was helpful, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.